When the plane broke apart, she was still strapped to her seat. One moment, there was Christmas music playing softly through the cabin speakers, a tray table with a half-finished drink in front of her, and the comforting hum of engines cutting through the clouds. The next moment, there was only wind. Wind so loud it felt like it was screaming. Wind tearing at her clothes, whipping her hair, turning the world into a blur of white and green and impossible speed. 16-year-old Anna had never felt so small. She didn't know it yet, but she was falling from the sky. The flight had been a gift. Anna and her mother were flying home for the holidays, crossing over a vast stretch of rainforest between one city and another. It was supposed to be a short, simple trip. Just a few hours between the boarding gate and the embrace of family waiting on the other side. Anna loved flying. She liked the way the world turned into a map far below, rivers becoming silver lines, mountains becoming shadows, cities turning into tiny clusters of light. She and her mother sat side by side, talking quietly, sharing snacks from a plastic bag they'd brought on board. Her mother, a quiet woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile, kept glancing out of the window at the clouds. "It looks like a painting," she said. Anna nodded. She didn't know it would be one of the last things she'd ever hear her mother say. They hit the storm without warning. Turbulence, at first, felt like a joke. Little bumps that made some passengers laugh, others gripped their armrests a bit tighter. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're entering an area of rough air. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened." Anna fastened hers, just as she'd been taught. The shaking grew worse. Cups rattled. Overhead bins vibrated. A baby started to cry 3 rows ahead. Someone laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh people use when they're pretending they're not afraid. Lightning flashed outside the window, forking through clouds that had turned from soft white to bruised purple. Then came the first real jolt. The plane dropped suddenly, as if it had fallen through a trapdoor. Gasps filled the cabin. A food cart slammed into the ceiling before crashing back down. Anna's stomach lifted into her chest. She looked at her mother. Her mother's face was pale. Her hand tightened around Anna's. "It's okay," her mother whispered. "Just turbulence." It wasn't just turbulence. The storm swallowed the plane. Rain hammered the metal skin. Wind clawed at the wings. The cabin lights flickered, then went out for a heartbeat before returning in a sickly yellow glow. An oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling above Anna's head, swinging wildly. Someone screamed. The sound of the engines changed, no longer a steady drone, but something higher, more desperate, like a machine being pushed beyond what it was meant to do. The world tilted. The aisle was no longer flat, it was a slope. People, bags, and food trays slid toward the back of the cabin. A suitcase burst from an overhead bin and crashed into a passenger. Anna's heart pounded so hard she could hear it above the storm. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard her mother's voice one last time. "Anna." That was all. What happened next lasted only a few seconds. It would replay in Anna's mind for years. There was a sound like metal tearing. Not a crash, not an explosion, something worse. A ripping, screaming noise as if the plane itself were being pulled apart. The ceiling above them split open. Suddenly, there was sky where there should have been plastic panels and light fixtures. Wind and rain exploded into the cabin. Papers, pillows, pieces of luggage and pieces of people were sucked upward into the roaring darkness. Anna felt her seat shake, then wrench sideways. The world flipped. She was no longer in a plane. She was in open air, still strapped to a row of 3 seats, the metal frame spinning and tumbling as it fell. For one impossible moment, she could see everything. Above her, broken pieces of the fuselage, trailing smoke and flame. Below her, an endless carpet of green, the rainforest, dense and indifferent. She wanted to scream, but the wind stole the sound from her throat. Anna was falling from the sky, 2 miles above the ground. And there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. She did not pass out. Later, rescuers and doctors would say that was almost stranger than her survival. Many people lose consciousness in situations like that. Anna didn't. Time stretched. The roar of the wind became a kind of constant background noise. Her mind, perhaps to protect itself, narrowed its focus. When Anna opened her eyes, she thought she was still in the sky. Above her, there was nothing but green. Not sky blue, but a deep, shifting green that moved with the wind and filtered the sunlight into broken, dancing patterns. Her head throbbed. Her back ached. There was a taste of iron in her mouth. For a long moment, she didn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. The world felt wrong, too quiet after the roaring chaos of the storm and the tearing metal. Then the memories crashed back. The plane. The storm. The ripping sound. The fall. Her hand flew to her chest, searching for something, someone. Mama. There was no answer. Anna was still strapped into her seat. The row of 3 seats had landed upside down, half buried in a bed of leaves and broken branches. Somehow, the seat belt had stayed fastened. Somehow, her spine had not snapped. She fumbled with the buckle, fingers shaking, and managed to release it. She slid off the seat and onto the forest floor, her legs almost too weak to hold her. The air smelled of earth and plants and something else, a faint hint of smoke in the distance. She looked down at herself. One foot was bare, the other still had a shoe. Her dress was torn. Her arms and legs were covered in bruises and small cuts. Her right eye was swollen, and there was a deep gash on her collarbone, sticky with blood. But she was alive. She should not have been. Everyone would tell her that later. Right then, she didn't feel lucky. She felt wrong. As if she were standing in a place where she wasn't supposed to exist. The jungle was loud. At first, Anna had thought it was quiet. Compared to the storm, anything would be. But as her hearing adjusted, she realized the forest around her was full of sound. Insects hummed and buzzed in a constant, high-pitched chorus. Birds screeched somewhere above. Leaves rustled as unseen creatures moved through the undergrowth. And beneath all of that, like a heartbeat, there was the distant murmur of water. A river. The thought appeared in her mind, not as a word, but as a memory. Her parents were both biologists. Anna had grown up surrounded by books and documentaries about the rainforest, about ecosystems and survival and the unwritten rules of wild places. Her father had told her once, "If you're ever lost in the jungle and you don't know what to do, find water. Follow it. Rivers lead to people." She had been 10 years old at the time. It had sounded like the start of an adventure story. Now, in the broken light under the canopy, that memory felt like a rope thrown to a drowning person. Anna called out for her mother until her voice became a dry whisper. She searched the immediate area, stumbling over roots and fallen branches, pushing aside ferns and vines with trembling hands. She found pieces of the plane. A section of wall here. An armrest there. Part of an overhead bin, cracked open like an eggshell. She found a single shoe that wasn't hers. She found silence where there should have been voices. No one answered her calls. No one called her name. The truth settled on her shoulders slowly, like a weight she couldn't shake off. If anyone else had survived the fall, they were not close. Maybe they were trapped. Maybe they were already gone. Maybe she was the only one who had landed like this, caught by the trees, broken but breathing. She wanted to sit down and never get up again. Instead, she listened. There it was again, the distant murmur of moving water. A direction. She had almost nothing. No bag. No food. No clean water. No map. No shoes, really, only one. But she had something many other survivors never get. Knowledge. From a childhood spent listening to her parents, from school lessons she'd thought were boring at the time, from books she'd half-read in the background. She knew that in the jungle. You don't wander aimlessly. You don't drink any water you see without thinking. You don't scream all day and waste your strength. You move with purpose. You conserve energy. You follow signs of life. Anna tore a strip from the bottom of her dress and tied it around her injured shoulder as tightly as she could handle. The pain made her dizzy, but it also made her feel more awake. Then she picked a direction, the direction of the distant sound of water, and started walking. The forest floor tried to stop her. The jungle was not a flat, friendly place. It was a puzzle of roots and holes, of fallen trunks and hidden drops, of plants that grabbed at her ankles and branches that time in the jungle didn't move in hours and minutes. It moved in footsteps. In falls. In the number of times she forced herself to stand back up. Daylight filtered through the canopy in thin, shifting beams that never quite reached the ground. It was always either not bright enough or fading too fast. At night, it was worse. Anna survived her first night in the forest by curling up on a patch of slightly drier ground, her back against the roots of a huge tree, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't sleep so much as drift in and out of half-dreams. Strange calls echoed in the darkness. Branches snapped nearby as animals moved past. Insects buzzed so loudly in her ears that it almost felt like voices whispering. Once, something brushed against her leg. She froze, barely breathing, the primitive part of her brain screaming predator, predator, predator. The thing moved on. She didn't know if it had been a harmless animal or something that had chosen, for whatever reason, not to attack. Either way, when the first gray light of morning filtered down through the leaves, Anna was still alive. She took it as a sign. Her injuries grew heavier, even as her body grew lighter. The gash on her shoulder became hot and angry-looking. Flies buzzed around it. Her head throbbed with a dull, constant ache. At some point, she realized that vision in one eye was blurry. She had probably suffered a concussion. Her feet were a collection of cuts, blisters, and deep, dark bruises. The single remaining shoe was soaked and slowly falling apart. Eventually, it slipped off in a patch of sucking mud and was gone. From that point on, she walked barefoot. Each step sent a jolt of pain up her legs. Rocks cut her skin. Thorns lodged in her soles. She pulled some of them out. Others stayed. She kept walking. She found traces of the crash days later. A small piece of metal half buried in the mud. A scrap of fabric clinging to a branch. Once, the burned remains of a section of fuselage, wrapped around trees like a dead silver snake. Inside the blackened shell, she saw seats. They were twisted, melted, almost unrecognizable. She stood there for a long time, staring at them, knowing, without needing anyone to say it, that there must have been people sitting in those seats when they hit the ground. Her stomach twisted. She didn't search for bodies. She couldn't. Instead, she whispered a wordless apology to the air and kept moving. Downstream. Always downstream. Hunger became a constant companion. At first, she tried to ignore it. Then, when that became impossible, she tried to remember which fruits her parents had told her were safe. The problem was, most of the fruits she saw, hidden among leaves or fallen on the ground, looked nothing like the ones from books or markets. She was afraid of eating something toxic, something that would kill her slower than the crash had failed to do. So she ate very little. A few tiny, sour fruits that looked like ones she remembered. A handful of nuts she recognized from trips to the forest with her parents. Mostly, she drank water and walked. Her body began to break itself down to keep her moving. Fat first. Then muscle. Her arms became thinner. Her legs shook more often. But her mind, strangely, stayed clear. She thought of her mother. She thought of her father. She thought of the people who would be searching for the crash site. She didn't think, they will find me. She thought, I will make it easier for them to find me. By staying near the water. By moving. By refusing to die quietly in one place where no one would ever look. On the 10th day, she heard a new sound. It was faint at first, barely different from the usual chorus of the jungle. A buzzing. Low. Mechanical. Not an insect, Not a bird, not the wind. Anna stopped walking and listened. The buzzing grew louder. She stumbled out from under the thicker trees to a slightly more open patch by the stream and looked up. For a heartbeat, she saw it, a helicopter, dark against the pale slice of sky, moving across her tiny piece of the world. Her heart leaped. She waved her arms, screamed, jumped up and down, every movement costing more energy than she really had left. The helicopter didn't slow. It passed by, continued on, and disappeared beyond the wall of trees. Silence fell again. For a moment, she stood there, empty. It would have been easy, in that moment, to decide that she had been wrong, that no one was coming, that nothing she did mattered. Instead, she did what she had been doing since the moment the plane broke apart. She kept going. It didn't end in a dramatic rescue with ropes and cameras. In the end, survival came down to something small. Almost ordinary. A curve in the stream. A bend in the trees. And a man. Anna was following the stream as always when she saw movement ahead. Not the quick, liquid movement of an animal. Something more upright. More deliberate. A man stood on the opposite bank. He was thin, his clothes worn, his eyes scanning the water. A local, someone who belonged to the forest in a way she never would. For a second, they just stared at each other. To him, she must have looked like a ghost, a teenage girl, barefoot, bruised, caked in mud, with one eye swollen and a dried line of blood on her neck, emerging from the jungle as if the trees themselves had spat her out. Anna tried to speak. At first, no sound came out. Then, hoarse and broken, in a language they both shared, she managed to say, "I was in the plane. The plane that crashed." The man's eyes widened. Slowly, as if afraid to scare her away, he stepped closer. "You survived?" She nodded. Her legs gave out. The man ran the last few steps, caught her before she hit the ground, and shouted something Anna was too tired to understand fully. From somewhere behind him, other figures appeared.